The Cleveland Browns just turned their own fan base into skeptics. One decision, one name left out of the conversation again. And suddenly, loyal supporters are talking boycott like it's a playoff strategy. But here's what makes this moment different from every other quarterback controversy in NFL history. This isn't just frustration over a coaching choice. This feels personal. This feels calculated. Because somewhere between the practice reports, the media leaks, and the endless, we're still evaluating statements. Something shifted. Fans stopped believing this was real competition. They started believing it was theater. And if you've been following the Browns' quarterback situation closely, you know exactly why that belief took root. The question isn't whether Deshaun Watson or Shedeur Sanders is the better choice anymore. The real question is whether any of this was ever actually a choice at all, or if the entire offseason has been one long, carefully orchestrated narrative designed to keep millions of people watching, talking, and arguing, while the real decision was made weeks ago in some conference room nobody gets to see. Today, we're breaking down how the Browns managed to create a situation so suspicious that even their most loyal fans started planning their exit strategy. Let's start with what everyone's starting to notice. The Cleveland Browns didn't just announce their quarterback situation. They created a storyline, and not the kind that happens naturally when two players compete for the same job. This is the kind that gets manufactured, stretched out, and carefully fed to media outlets in perfectly timed increments designed to keep the conversation alive, the debates raging, and the attention locked on Cleveland regardless of what's actually happening on the field. Think about how this has unfolded. At first, it seemed reasonable. Deshaun Watson is the veteran with the massive contract. Shedeur Sanders is the young prospect with momentum and intrigue. Two quarterbacks, one starting spot, normal NFL stuff. Except it's not normal. Because the way this situation has been managed, the constant updates, the deliberate ambiguity, and the strategic leaks all point to something more calculated than a genuine competition. Mary Kay Kitten, the Browns beat reporter, dropped a report early in the offseason saying Watson emerged from voluntary minicamp with an edge over Sanders. Then she followed it up saying Watson had the inside track to be named QB1. Then another report. Then another angle. Each one adding just enough fuel to keep the fire burning without actually resolving anything. And that pattern matters because it's not what genuine competitions look like. Genuine competitions have clarity at some point. They have moments where one player clearly outperforms the other. They have an ending. This has none of those things. What this actually looks like is a movie trailer that keeps showing just enough to keep people guessing, but never enough to give anything away. It's designed to create questions, not answers. Questions sell tickets. Questions drive engagement. Questions make people tune in every single day hoping today's the day the mystery finally gets solved. And the Browns have mastered the art of keeping that mystery alive. The strangest part is that fans know it. They've started connecting dots that the organization probably hoped would stay disconnected. They're asking why a simple quarterback decision requires this much time. They're wondering why every single practice report comes with a different narrative. They're questioning why a choice that should be based purely on performance keeps getting framed through the lens of business metrics and public perception instead. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The Browns aren't even trying to hide it anymore. The organization has been conditioning fans, slowly and deliberately, to accept a certain outcome. Every report about Watson's progress, every mention of his inside track, every phrase about how close this competition is, it's all been building toward one specific narrative. The narrative where Deshaun Watson remains the starting quarterback despite months of teasing the possibility that Shedeur Sanders might take over. But fans aren't stupid. Once you start seeing the pattern, you can't unsee it. And the pattern here is obvious. An overcrowded quarterback room, strategic media leaks, delayed decisions. Constant uncertainty. It's not a coincidence. It's a strategy. And the more people realize it's a strategy, the more the entire thing starts to feel less like sports and more like marketing manipulation. The real kicker is that this approach works until it doesn't. You can build massive amounts of hype. You can dominate the news cycle. You can get people talking, arguing, and emotionally invested. But there's a breaking point. There's a moment where people stop believing in the process and start believing they're being sold. And when that happens, the entire thing starts to crumble because trust is way harder to rebuild than hype is to create. What the Browns have essentially done is take a quarterback competition that should take maybe 3 weeks to resolve and stretched it into a 5-month saga complete with plot twists, dramatic reveals, and conflicting reports. And they did it because attention equals money in the modern NFL. More headlines, more conversation. More people talking about the Browns, even if they're talking about how suspicious everything feels. The problem is that this strategy only works if the payoff matches the buildup. If you've spent an entire offseason convincing your fanbase that change is coming, that the future is knocking on the door, that something new is about to happen, you have to actually deliver on that promise. You can't spend 4 months building anticipation for Shedeur Sanders and then trot Deshaun Watson out there in week 1, expecting everyone to just shrug and accept it. That's not how human psychology works. That's not how fan investment works. And once fans realize they've been strung along, once they understand that months of buildup were designed purely to keep them engaged rather than to reflect actual football evaluations, everything changes. Every press conference sounds rehearsed. Every "we're still evaluating" quote sounds like a script that was written weeks ago. Every update about how close the competition is starts to sound less like insight and more like promotion. The illusion of authenticity disappears. And once that illusion is gone, rebuilding it becomes almost impossible. Because the Browns aren't just making a football decision anymore. They're answering a much bigger question. Do they respect their fans enough to be honest about what's happening? Or are they comfortable manipulating the narrative as long as the attention keeps flowing? Here's a truth that nobody really wants to say out loud, but everyone knows is true. The NFL doesn't actually care about fair competition. Every single team sells the idea of competition like it's the most important thing in the world, but they sell it the exact same way stores sell Black Friday discounts, with manufactured urgency, artificial scarcity, and the constant reminder that if you don't act now, you'll miss out. The Browns understand this perfectly. They know that if they just came out and said, "Deshaun Watson is our starter," the announcement would hit the news cycle for maybe 2 days before moving on to the next story. But if they say, "We have an open competition," and then drag that competition out for 5 months, that's not 2 days of coverage. That's 5 months of debates, arguments, trending topics, and people tuning in hoping for updates. From a pure business standpoint, it's genius. You get constant attention. You get multiple opportunities to market the team. You create urgency and intrigue that sells tickets, merchandise, and streaming subscriptions. You give fans reasons to check social media every single day. You generate content for analysts, podcasters, and sports commentators who suddenly have an endless supply of material to discuss. But here's where the genius becomes dangerous. Because attention is only valuable if it translates into results. And when you stretch a decision out this long, when you build this much anticipation, when you let fans emotionally invest this deeply in a specific outcome, the payoff has to match. It just has to. Think about it from the fan perspective for a second. You've been told for months that this competition is real. You've been shown practice reports about Shedeur Sanders looking sharp. You've been teased with the possibility that something new might actually happen. You've invested emotionally in a narrative where the future shows up. You've imagined what it looks like, what it feels like, what the energy would be like if the young guy actually got his shot. Then week 1 arrives. Deshaun Watson jogs onto the field as the starter. And suddenly, everything you've been hearing all offseason feels like a lie. Not because Watson can't win games, he might be able to, but because the entire process that led to this moment feels fake. It feels like the decision was already made and the offseason was just one long performance designed to keep you watching. When that happens, you don't get disappointment. You get anger. You get the kind of backlash that shows up as empty seats in the stadium, late ticket sales, and a fan base that feels disconnected from the team they're supposed to support. You get people organizing boycotts. You get fans who have paid thousands of dollars over the years suddenly deciding it's not worth it anymore. And this is where the business strategy actually backfires. Because once fans stop trusting the process, once they believe they're being manipulated instead of informed, the attention doesn't stay positive. It flips. It becomes critical. It becomes skeptical. People who were engaged become disengaged. People who might have bought tickets don't. People who might have defended the team in arguments online suddenly become their loudest critics. The irony is that if the Browns had just made the decision quickly, evaluated based on actual football performance, and announced it with confidence, they might not have generated as much initial buzz. But they also wouldn't have created this situation where the entire fanbase is questioning the legitimacy of the entire process. What's interesting is that the business argument for Deshaun Watson isn't actually that strong. He's a massive financial commitment. His injury history is concerning. The version of him that dominated with Houston feels like ancient history at this point. The Achilles injuries raise real questions about mobility and durability. And realistically, expecting him to suddenly reappear as the dominant force he once was is more hopeful thinking than actual evaluation. Meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders represents something completely different. He's unproven at the professional level, absolutely, but he brings momentum. He brings curiosity. He brings a fan base that isn't just interested, they're invested. His presence alone shifts the entire conversation from what the Browns used to be to what they could become. That's powerful. That's exciting. That's the kind of thing that actually sells. So when the organization keeps insisting this competition is close, fans start asking close based on what? Is it based on performance metrics, potential, contract size, public perception, something else entirely? And when there's no clear answer, when every statement is vague and every update is ambiguous, people start filling in the blanks themselves. And they usually fill them in with cynicism rather than optimism. The business strategy of stretching this out was designed to maximize attention, and it's worked. The Browns have dominated headlines. They've driven conversations. They've kept people engaged all offseason. But the second part of the strategy, delivering a payoff that justifies all that buildup, might be where everything falls apart, because you can build hype. You can create drama. You can control the narrative for a while, but you can't control how people react when the reality doesn't match the expectation. And right now, expectations are built sky high. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson without the marketing spin, without the optimistic projections, and without the media narrative that keeps saying he's emerging or gaining an edge. Let's just talk about what we actually know about his situation. Watson signed a massive contract with the Browns. We're talking about one of the biggest quarterback deals in NFL history. 5 years, $230 million guaranteed. It's a commitment that's impossible to ignore, impossible to walk away from, and impossible to separate from any decision about his future with the team. When you have that much money invested in a player, it changes the conversation. It's no longer purely about who's better on the field. It becomes about sunk costs, financial commitment, and whether the organization can afford to admit they made a mistake by shifting direction. This is the uncomfortable reality that nobody really wants to talk about, but it's the elephant in every room where this decision is being made. Here's what we actually know about Watson's current state. He's coming off serious injuries, not minor stuff. Achilles tendon surgeries, multiple of them. These aren't the kind of injuries that just heal and leave you the same player. Achilles injuries fundamentally change what a quarterback can do on the field, especially a quarterback whose game has always been partially dependent on mobility. The Watson that dominated with the Houston Texans was a dynamic, elusive, hard-to-game plan against player. He could move around the pocket. He could extend plays with his legs. He could make defenders miss. That's part of what made him elite. But Achilles injuries take that away. They limit explosiveness. They reduce the ability to move laterally. They change how you operate within an offense. And look, Watson is a talented guy. He can still play quarterback at a high level. But the version everyone's expecting, the version that's going to come back and dominate the way he did in Houston, that version might not exist anymore. That's not to say he can't be good. That's just to say that expecting exact replication of his past performance is more hopeful than realistic. But here's where it gets complicated. The Browns have invested so much money in Watson that walking away from him feels like admitting failure. It feels like admitting they made a mistake. And organizations don't like admitting mistakes, especially not when those mistakes involve $250 million contracts. So what do they do instead? They double down. They find reasons to believe. They convince themselves that he's still got it, that he just needs the right system, that he just needs one more chance. And maybe that's true. Maybe Watson does come back and plays well. But fans aren't required to believe that narrative, especially not after months of being told they should be excited about an alternative. From a football evaluation standpoint, the argument for Sanders isn't that he's definitely better right now. He's not. He hasn't played a professional snap. He's unproven. He's a complete unknown. But that unknown status is actually part of what makes him appealing to fans. Because with Watson, fans know what they're getting. They know the injury history. They know the age. They know the limitations. With Sanders, they get to imagine possibility. They get to imagine what could be. And that matters more than people realize. Because in sports, perception often matters more than reality until reality has a chance to prove itself. Right now, the perception is that Watson is a known quantity who might not deliver at the level people need. And Sanders is an unknown who could be special. Those perceptions might be wrong, but they're powerful enough to shape how fans feel about their team. The real issue is that by stretching this competition out, by teasing the possibility of Sanders taking over, by building all this uncertainty around Watson's status, the organization has basically admitted that even they're not 100% confident in Watson as the answer. Because if they were confident, if they genuinely believed he's the guy to lead this team forward, they would have just announced it and moved on. The fact that they haven't done that, the fact that they keep this storyline alive by constantly saying the competition is close, the fact that they give Sanders meaningful snaps and meaningful opportunities in practice and in preseason, all of that sends a message that Watson isn't the slam dunk decision. And when fans pick up on that message, when they realize that even the organization seems hedging its bets, it becomes impossible to get excited about Watson as the starter. Because at the end of the day, what fans are reacting to isn't Watson the person or Watson the player. They're reacting to Watson as a symbol of stagnation, as a reminder of the approach that hasn't worked, as the going backwards option when there's a chance to go forward. And no amount of positive press conferences or optimistic reporting is going to change that feeling once it's taken root. The Browns have created a situation where they're asking their fans to be excited about keeping a guy who has underperformed, who has injury concerns, and who might not ever be the player he was before, while the alternative sits right there representing everything fans actually want to see. And then they act surprised when fans start leaning toward the alternative. Now let's talk about what Shedeur Sanders represents, because this isn't about him being objectively better than Watson right now. This is about what he symbolizes and why that matters infinitely more than his actual statistics could ever matter. Sanders represents momentum. He brings energy. He brings a different kind of attention and spotlight that the Browns simply can't generate any other way. When you mention Shedeur Sanders, people lean in. When you mention Deshaun Watson in this context, people grimace. That's not about football skill. That's about narrative, perception, and what people want to see happen. There's something powerful about the idea of a new era. There's something powerful about believing that the mistakes of the past are being corrected, that lessons have been learned, that the organization is finally ready to move in a different direction. Sanders represents all of that. He's not contaminated by the Browns' recent history. He's not connected to the failures and the frustrations and the endless cycle of disappointing seasons. Fans have been watching this team fail for years. They've seen quarterback after quarterback get a shot and come up short. They've been promised change before and watched nothing change. They've invested emotionally in narratives that didn't deliver. So when Sanders shows up, when he brings youth and possibility, and the promise of something actually being different, fans grab onto that with both hands because they need to believe that something new is coming. The curiosity factor alone is powerful enough to fill stadiums. People want to see what Sanders can do. They want to find out if he's actually got what it takes. They want to be part of discovering the next great quarterback, not watching the resurrection of a quarterback whose best days might be behind him. There's hope in that curiosity. And hope is one of the most valuable things a franchise can sell. Here's what nobody talks about enough. In modern sports, fans aren't just buying football. They're buying stories. They're buying excitement. They're buying the feeling that something new is happening right now, something they're part of, something that matters. And that feeling is not Deshaun Watson. That feeling is Shedeur Sanders. When you look at why fans get excited about players, it's rarely just about statistics. It's about what those players represent. It's about being part of a journey. It's about getting to watch something grow from the beginning rather than buying into something that's already established and familiar. Sanders offers that journey. Watson offers security and proven mediocrity. And this is where the tension really builds. Because the organization is essentially asking fans to get excited about security when fans are craving revolution. They're asking people to settle for a proven quantity when there's a chance to gamble on something with unlimited upside. That's a tough ask under the best circumstances. After months of building anticipation for Sanders, it becomes almost impossible. What makes Sanders' presence so valuable is that he shifts the entire conversation. Instead of asking, "Can Watson still be great?" people are asking, "What if Sanders actually is great?" That's a fundamentally different and infinitely more exciting question. And once fans start asking that question, once they start imagining what the possibilities could be, going back to Watson feels like accepting defeat. The other thing about Sanders is that he brings a different kind of visibility. His father is a famous coach and commentator. There's media attention built in. There's interest beyond just Cleveland fans. If Sanders gets a real shot and actually plays well, suddenly the Browns aren't just a regional story, they're a national story. That's valuable from every perspective. It's exciting from a sports perspective. It's valuable from a business perspective. But the organization seems reluctant to actually commit to that narrative. They keep one foot in the Watson camp and one foot in the Sanders camp, unwilling to fully commit to either story. And that hedging is exactly what's making fans angry, because it looks like they're stringing Sanders along, building him up, creating this massive anticipation, and then planning to pull the rug out at the last second. It's like watching someone get invited to the party, watching them show up excited, watching the party build excitement about their arrival, and then watching the host tell them, "Actually, we're going with someone else." That's not competition, that's manipulation, and fans know the difference. What's particularly interesting is that the Sanders camp isn't even asking for a guarantee. They're asking for a fair shot. They're asking for the chance to compete on actual merits, not on contract size or financial commitment. Shedeur has said publicly that he wants competition. He wants to earn it. He doesn't want it handed to him. And that confidence, that willingness to compete, actually makes him more appealing to fans than Watson's default status. Because Watson gets the starting job by default due to his contract. Sanders would have to earn it. And earning something is always more compelling than receiving something based on past financial commitments. The narrative of the young guy who has to fight for his opportunity is infinitely more interesting than the narrative of the veteran who gets to keep his spot because of the salary cap. And that's why the threat of boycott is real. It's not because fans think Sanders is definitively better. It's because they've been led to believe he might be, they've been given hope that change is coming, and now they're terrified that hope is being snatched away right before they can grab it. The boycott conversation isn't coming out of nowhere. It's not hysteria. It's not overreaction. It's a direct response to a specific feeling that's spreading through the fan base like wildfire. The feeling that they're being manipulated. The feeling that the decision was already made, and the entire offseason has been one long con designed to keep them engaged, while the actual choice remains locked away in some boardroom. And this backlash is building faster than the organization probably anticipated. Because once fans start questioning whether they're watching a real competition or a carefully managed narrative, everything changes. Every press conference becomes suspect. Every report becomes something to decode rather than something to believe. Every update gets filtered through a lens of skepticism instead of hope. The boycott isn't really about whether Watson or Sanders would be a better quarterback. That's not what drives people to stop attending games and stop supporting a team they've invested years of their lives in. Boycotts come from a deeper place. They come from feeling disrespected. They come from feeling manipulated. They come from realizing that the organization doesn't respect fans enough to be straight with them about what's actually happening. And the Browns have created the perfect storm for that feeling to flourish. They've been deliberately vague. They've contradicted themselves. They've allowed conflicting reports. They've kept saying things are close without ever explaining what close actually means in this context. They've implied things without ever actually saying them. They've strung fans along with just enough possibility to keep hope alive, but not enough commitment to feel real. That's exhausting. And when fans get exhausted, when they feel like they're being played, when they realize the organization doesn't value their emotional investment enough to be honest about their decisions, that's when they start thinking about walking away. And not quietly either. They talk about it. They organize around it. They threaten to vote with their wallet by staying home instead of filling stadium seats. The warning signs were already there if anyone was paying attention. The 2023 season saw attendance issues when fans felt disconnected from the team. The energy in the stadium felt wrong because the fans didn't feel like they were part of something authentic. And now, the organization is potentially recreating that exact situation on a larger scale. Because here's what most organizations don't understand about fan boycotts. They don't happen because fans stop caring. They happen because fans care too much and feel too betrayed. If fans didn't care, they'd just stop showing up quietly. But when fans are organizing boycotts, when they're talking about it online, when they're trying to recruit others to join them, that's coming from a place of real anger. That's coming from disappointment. That's coming from caring deeply about something and feeling like that care is being taken advantage of. The Browns have done something really difficult to do. They've taken people who would bleed for this team and made them question whether that loyalty is worth it. That's not a small thing. That's not something that gets fixed with one good season or one great performance. That's something that takes years to rebuild once the trust has been broken. And the more the organization delays the decision, the more the backlash grows. Because every day that goes by without clarity feels like another day of manipulation. Every report that contradicts the previous report feels like more proof that this wasn't genuine. Every statement about how close things are feels like another confirmation that the organization is comfortable stringing fans along. What's particularly dangerous about the boycott sentiment is that it's not just coming from casual fans. It's coming from longtime supporters. It's coming from people who have history with this team, who have invested thousands of dollars over years and years of following. Those are the hardest fans to get back once they decide they've had enough, because they've already given so much. And if the organization wastes that goodwill by manipulating them one more time, the question becomes, why would they ever come back? The Cleveland Browns organization is in a position right now where every move is being analyzed through a lens of suspicion. Every decision is being questioned. Every delay is being interpreted as confirmation of what fans already believe, that this was never a real competition. And once that belief takes hold, once fans stop believing in the process, it becomes almost impossible to get them to believe again. The smart move would be clarity. The smart move would be to announce a decision based on actual football evaluations and then move forward confidently. Because right now, the longer this goes on, the more damage the organization is doing to its relationship with its fanbase. And that relationship is worth more than any single season or any single quarterback decision. But they're not going that direction. They're continuing to delay. They're continuing to build anticipation. They're continuing to act like this is still a genuine competition when everyone, including fans, analysts, and probably even people within the organization, knows how this is probably going to end. And that mismatch between what people expect and what they've been led to hope for is creating a pressure cooker situation that's going to explode the moment the final decision is announced. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The way this story has spread isn't normal. It's not what a typical quarterback competition looks like in media coverage. It's reached a level of attention that feels disproportionate and almost manufactured in how perfectly it spreads across different platforms and different outlets. A normal quarterback battle might get coverage from local beat reporters. You'd see analysis from ESPN analysts who cover the NFL. You'd see national sports media discussing it because it's relevant to the league. That's expected. That's standard. But this situation has transcended all of that. It's showing up in places that rarely focus on sports at all. It's becoming a cultural conversation, not just a sports conversation. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens when there's a deliberate effort to keep a story alive, to keep it interesting, and to keep it spreading. Whether that's coming from the Browns organization itself, whether it's coming from ESPN trying to capitalize on the drama, or whether it's coming from social media algorithms that reward conflict and speculation, the effect is the same. The story gets bigger, more people get involved, and suddenly this quarterback situation has become something way bigger than quarterback situations usually are. What's interesting is that people have started questioning where the information is actually coming from. Who's feeding these reports to Mary Kay Kitten and other beat reporters? What's the motivation behind each leak? Why does information keep coming out in perfectly timed increments designed to keep the conversation fresh? These questions don't have clear answers, but they add to the sense that something bigger and more strategic is happening behind the scenes than just genuine updates about a quarterback competition. And this is where the skepticism really starts to metastasize. Because once people start questioning the sources of information, once they start wondering if reports are genuine insights or carefully orchestrated PR moves, the entire media apparatus around the story becomes suspect. Every report gets filtered through a lens of who benefits from this story being told right now. And when you start asking that question, you start seeing patterns that confirm your suspicions. The local beat reporters covering the team have their own relationship with the organization. They need access to coaches, players, and front office people to do their jobs. And organizations are very good at managing that access. They're very good at deciding who gets information and when. So when Mary Kay Kitten drops a report that Watson has the inside track, fans start wondering if that's actually an insider's perspective or if that's the organization managing the narrative through a trusted media voice. And look, Mary Kay probably isn't doing anything wrong. She probably genuinely believes the information she's reporting. She's been covering this team for a long time. She has relationships. But the timing of reports, the way they build on each other, the way they seem designed to shape opinion rather than just report facts, that's what's making fans believe the entire thing is being orchestrated. There's a phenomenon in media where reporters essentially become mouthpieces for the organizations they cover. Not intentionally, not as part of some grand conspiracy, but just because of the natural dynamics of access and relationship. The organization needs media coverage. The reporter needs information. A symbiotic relationship develops. And sometimes, that relationship means reports are being shaped by what the organization wants reported rather than what independent evaluation would suggest. Fans have started noticing this. They've started saying things like, local beat reporters are carrying water for the team, and the media is doing the organization's PR work. And whether or not that's entirely fair, the perception is powerful. Because once fans believe the media can't be trusted to give them unbiased information, they stop believing any of the reports coming out. What's also interesting is how ESPN's national coverage has played into this. ESPN benefits from this story being as dramatic and conflicted as possible. If the Browns had just announced Watson as the starter, it's one day of coverage and everyone moves on. But if this drags on, if there's uncertainty, if there's drama, if there's the possibility of a major shock, that's content. That's something to talk about for months. That's something that keeps people engaged and watching. So ESPN probably has an incentive to amplify the Sanders storyline, to keep the drama alive, to suggest that this is genuinely competitive. Not because they're trying to manipulate anyone, but just because drama is better for their business than clarity. And the Browns probably understand that dynamic and play into it. The net effect is a media ecosystem that's optimized for drama rather than clarity. Everything gets amplified. Every conflict gets highlighted. Every piece of speculation becomes a story. And in that environment, the actual facts of what's happening become almost secondary to the narrative surrounding those facts. And fans get trapped in that ecosystem. They're trying to figure out what's actually happening, but they're getting information filtered through layers of speculation, motivation, and narrative shaping. Is Watson actually ahead, or is that just what people are saying? Are the reports accurate, or are they just the organization managing perception? Is this a real competition, or is the media manufacturing drama? These questions can't be definitively answered from the outside, so fans make their best guesses. And right now, their best guess is that this entire thing is being orchestrated for maximum attention and that the actual outcome was decided weeks ago. Whether that's true or not is almost irrelevant at this point, because perception has become reality. Fans believe they're being manipulated, and that belief is driving their response. We're approaching a moment that's bigger than just a quarterback decision. This is a crossroads for the Browns organization, and the choice they make is going to define what kind of franchise they want to be, what kind of relationship they want with their fan base, and whether they're actually serious about change or just serious about maintaining the status quo while pretending to consider alternatives. The decision itself is actually simple on the surface. Either Deshaun Watson starts in Week 1 or Shedeur Sanders starts in Week 1. One of them runs out onto that field, and the other one doesn't. It should be straightforward. But because of everything that's happened, Because of months of buildup and media coverage and speculation and rumors, this decision has become something way more complicated than just choosing between two quarterbacks. This is about identity. This is about whether the organization respects its fans. This is about whether the decision is actually based on football merit or whether it's being made to protect a massive financial investment and avoid admitting that maybe the path they chose wasn't the right one. This is about whether the entire offseason was genuine exploration or just really good marketing. If Shedeur Sanders runs out as the starter, the narrative shifts instantly. The headlines change. The conversation changes. The energy changes. It becomes a story about the future, about the organization finally being willing to take a risk, about change actually happening. And the stadium fills with people who are excited to be there, who believe in what's coming, who feel like they made the right choice by sticking with the team even when things looked questionable. The problem is that the organization probably isn't going to make that decision, because Watson's contract is too big, because the financial commitment is too deep, because admitting that Watson isn't the answer feels like admitting failure at the highest levels, and organizations don't like doing that. So Deshaun Watson probably takes that first snap. And when he does, after everything that's been said, everything that's been implied, and everything that fans have emotionally invested in, the reaction isn't going to be excitement. The reaction is going to be disappointment. And not quiet disappointment either. The kind that shows up in how people feel about their team, in whether they show up to games, in whether they buy merchandise, in whether they feel like this organization deserves their loyalty. Because at that point, it becomes undeniable that the entire offseason was theater. It becomes undeniable that decision was already made and fans were strung along. It becomes undeniable that the organization was comfortable manipulating their emotional investment as long as it served the business strategy. And that realization doesn't just disappear, it festers, it grows, it poisons the relationship between the organization and the fan base. But there's another way this could go. There's a world where the Browns actually commit to the future, where they actually take the risk, where they actually give Shedeur Sanders a real opportunity and a real shot at being the starting quarterback. And in that world, the entire calculus changes. Suddenly, the build-up makes sense. Suddenly, the months of speculation feel like a genuine exploration of possibilities rather than just manipulation. Suddenly, the fan base feels heard and respected. That version requires the organization to be willing to eat the Watson contract, to write off the financial investment, and to decide that moving forward is worth the short-term pain. It requires a level of organizational commitment to change that most NFL teams aren't actually willing to make. But it would solve so many of the issues that currently exist. Here's what's wild about this situation. The choice between these two quarterbacks is ultimately about whether the organization is going to trust its fans' instincts or ignore them. Because fans have made it pretty clear that they'd rather see Sanders get a real shot. They've made it clear that they're interested in seeing what he can do. They've made it clear that they'd rather gamble on potential than settle for a known quantity that hasn't delivered. And the organization has basically ignored that. They've proceeded as if fan preference doesn't matter, as if their choice has already been made regardless of what people want to see, as if the only thing that matters is protecting the Watson investment and pretending everything is still in play. That's a dangerous approach, because fans are not passive anymore. They're not just sitting back and accepting what they're told. They're reacting in real time. They're organizing. They're discussing. And in this case, they're talking about boycotts. And that's the kind of signal that's impossible to ignore. So the Browns find themselves at a moment where their decision is going to answer a question that goes way beyond football. They're going to answer whether they value their relationship with their fan base, whether they're willing to take risks, whether they're actually interested in change, and whether they can be trusted when they talk about competition and opportunity. And no matter which decision they make, there are real consequences. If they go with Watson, they have to manage a disappointed fan base that feels manipulated. If they go with Sanders, they have to manage the risk of investing in an unproven player and hoping it works out. But one of those choices respects the fans, and one of them doesn't. And right now, given everything that's happened, that distinction matters more than anything else. By now, you've probably started asking yourself the same question that fans across Cleveland are asking. The question that started all of this. Was this ever really a competition? Because looking back at how this has all unfolded, the evidence pointing toward this being choreographed theater rather than genuine evaluation is pretty substantial. The timing of reports, the way information has been released, the consistent messaging about how close things are without ever actually clarifying what close means. The strategic ambiguity, the deliberate withholding of clarity. All of it points towards something bigger than just two quarterbacks competing for a job. And once you start seeing it that way, you can't really unsee it. Because everything starts to look like it's part of the narrative rather than separate events. The positive reports about Watson's progress feel staged. The impressive performances from Sanders feel like they're being downplayed. The beat reporters' comments feel like they're following a script. The organization's statements feel calculated and tested rather than spontaneous and honest. The question itself is important because the answer determines how fans should feel about everything that's happening. If this is a real competition, then the delays and the uncertainty and the constant updates make sense. Teams are gathering information. Coaches are evaluating. Organizations are making difficult decisions. That's reasonable. That's legitimate. That's something fans can respect even if they disagree with the final choice. But if this isn't a real competition, if the decision was already made, and the entire offseason has been one long performance designed to keep people engaged and talking and watching, then everything feels different. Suddenly, the delays feel like manipulation. The uncertainty feels intentional. The constant updates feel like a script being followed rather than genuine information being shared. And the final decision feels like a confirmation of something fans already believed but were hoping wasn't true. And here's the thing about that question. Even if someone from the Browns organization came out tomorrow and explained that no, this absolutely is a real competition, that they genuinely haven't made a decision, that everything is actually up for grabs. Even then, a lot of fans wouldn't believe them. Because the pattern of how this has been managed, the way information has been released, the strategic ambiguity and careful messaging has already created a credibility gap that's too big to bridge. Once you lose fan trust, even just a little bit, that trust is incredibly hard to rebuild. Because every action gets interpreted through the lens of suspicion. Every statement gets decoded looking for hidden meaning. Every piece of information gets questioned for motivation and intent. That's exhausting for everyone involved, but it's also completely understandable given how this situation has been managed. The question, was this ever a real competition, is really asking, can I trust this organization? And the way the Browns have handled everything from the media leaks to the delayed decision to the strategic ambiguity suggests that maybe they can't be trusted. Maybe they have an agenda that doesn't align with fan interest. Maybe they're comfortable manipulating the situation to serve their own purposes. That perception might not be entirely fair. Organizations are complicated. Decisions are complicated. There might be legitimate reasons for delays and ambiguity. There might be factors that fans aren't seeing that are influencing how this is playing out. But perception is reality in sports, and the perception right now is deeply negative and getting more negative the longer this goes on. What's particularly interesting is that the question itself has become more important than the answer. Because even if the answer is, yes, this is a real competition, the fact that the question exists at all means something has gone wrong. It means the organization has failed at its most basic responsibility, which is communicating clearly with fans and maintaining a relationship based on honesty and respect. A well-managed organization could make this same decision without creating this level of suspicion. They could manage the process in a way that felt transparent and authentic. They could keep things competitive without making fans feel like they're being strung along. But the Browns haven't done that. They've done the opposite. They've created a situation that's ripe for suspicion and speculation and skepticism. And now, as we approach the moment where Week 1 arrives and a starting quarterback is finally announced, that question is going to hang over everything. It's going to follow the announcement. It's going to shape how fans receive the news. It's going to influence how they feel about the decision regardless of what the decision is. Because even if Watson is the right choice from a football standpoint, fans are going to remember how we got here. They're going to remember the months of speculation. They're going to remember the vague statements. They're going to remember the feeling of being strung along. And that memory is going to color their experience of the season. The ultimate damage has already been done, honestly. Not in who plays quarterback, but in the relationship between the organization and the fan base. That's the real issue. That's what's driving the boycott talk. That's what's making people question whether they want to keep investing in this team. It's not about Watson or Sanders at this point. It's about whether the organization respects the people who have dedicated their loyalty and their money and their emotional energy to this franchise. And that's a question that goes way beyond football. Here's a concept that economists and marketers know really well, but that sports organizations sometimes overlook. Attention without satisfaction is unsustainable. You can build incredible amounts of hype. You can dominate the headlines. You can keep people engaged and talking and arguing for months. But if the payoff doesn't match the buildup, if the reality doesn't align with the expectation, the attention doesn't just go away. It turns. Inverts. It becomes critical attention instead of positive attention. It becomes skeptical attention instead of engaged attention. It becomes the kind of attention that damages instead of builds. And that's exactly what the Browns are risking right now. Think about what the organization has done over the past several months. They've built this narrative where anything is possible. They've implied that change might be coming. They've created the space for fans to imagine a future where something different happens. They've let Shedeur Sanders get opportunities, meaningful snaps, moments where he could prove himself. They've hinted that nothing is guaranteed. They've suggested that this competition is genuinely competitive. All of that builds expectation. All of that creates hope. All of that makes fans emotionally invested in a specific outcome. You can't do all of that and then deliver something completely different and expect everything to be fine. That's not how human psychology works. That's not how fan investment works. That's not how relationships work. If you tell someone for 5 months that change is coming, if you build them up for transformation, if you let them hope for something new, and then you deliver the exact opposite, the disappointment isn't mild. It's profound. It's the kind of disappointment that sticks around. It's the kind of disappointment that makes people question their own judgment for even believing in the first place. Fans would accept Watson as the starter right now if the conversation over the past 5 months had been honest. If the organization had just said, "Watson is our guy, we're invested in him, let's see what he can do," fans might not love it, but they could accept it. They could move forward. They could focus on football instead of suspicion. But that's not what happened. Instead, the organization opened a door. It let fans see through that door. It let them imagine what's on the other side. And now, they're in the position of potentially closing that door and telling fans, actually, you were looking at that wrong. That's going to feel like a betrayal. Not because Watson is a bad choice, but because the process by which he became the choice feels compromised. The payoff problem is real, and it's going to manifest in concrete ways. It's going to show up in attendance numbers. It's going to show up in merchandise sales. It's going to show up in how engaged fans are during games. It's going to show up in ticket sales and streaming numbers and all the metrics that actually matter to the organization's bottom line. Because fans vote with their feet and their wallets. And if they feel manipulated, if they feel disrespected, if they feel like the process wasn't legitimate, they're going to express that through their purchasing decisions. And that's not speculation. That's what happened with the Browns' attendance issues in recent years. That's what happens with other franchises that lose fan trust. It has real consequences. What's interesting is that the payoff doesn't have to be perfect to satisfy fans. It just has to feel earned. It just has to feel like it was based on actual football evaluation rather than financial commitment or narrative management. It just has to feel honest. And right now, given how this has been managed, even if Watson is legitimately the better choice, it's going to be hard for fans to believe that's why he was selected. The timing of announcements matters. The framing matters. The clarity matters. Because fans are sophisticated consumers of sports media. They understand that organizations have agendas. They understand that financial commitments influence decisions. They understand that narratives are constructed. But they also know the difference between healthy transparency and manipulative ambiguity. And the Browns have chosen the latter. They've created ambiguity where there didn't need to be. They've let rumors and leaks and reports shape the narrative instead of managing the narrative with clear, direct communication. They've allowed speculation to fill the void instead of providing clarity. The payoff problem means that no matter what decision is made, it's going to land on a fan base that's already skeptical, already suspicious, already predisposed to think the decision was predetermined. And that's a position no organization wants to be in because it means you've already lost the PR battle before you've even announced the result. What should have happened is clarity. What should have happened is honest evaluation and honest communication. What should have happened is the organization treating its fanbase with enough respect to tell them what's actually happening instead of stringing them along for months. But that's not what happened. And now, the payoff, whatever it is, has to compete against months of buildup that probably can't actually be satisfied. This is what bad organizational management looks like. Not because the ultimate decision will necessarily be wrong, but because the way the decision was handled damaged the relationship between the organization and the people who support it. And that damage isn't going away quickly. If you're paying close attention, the warning signs are everywhere, and they're not subtle. They're screaming warnings about where this is headed if the Browns don't course correct immediately. The first warning sign is the attendance precedent. The Browns have dealt with attendance issues in recent years. Games where fans didn't show up. Games where the energy was flat. Games where people could see that fans had emotionally checked out. That's not because of bad luck or chance circumstances. That's because fans were disengaged from the team. And when fans are disengaged, the whole dynamic changes. It's not just about the stadium being empty. It's about what that emptiness says. It says fans don't feel like this is worth their time and money. It says fans don't believe in what they're watching. It says the emotional connection has been broken. And here's the thing about emotional connection in sports. It's a lot easier to break than it is to rebuild. Once fans have emotionally checked out, once they've decided a team isn't worth their investment, it takes a lot more than a good season or a great player to pull them back in. It takes time. It takes consistent delivery of what was promised. It takes the organization proving, over and over again, that they deserve another chance. And that's a much higher bar than just maintaining engagement in the first place. The second warning sign is the intensity of the boycott conversation. Boycotts don't emerge casually. They don't happen because fans are mildly disappointed. They happen because fans are angry enough to organize. They happen because fans feel disrespected. They happen because fans have decided the organization doesn't deserve their loyalty, and they're willing to act on that decision in a coordinated way. When you see boycott conversations emerging, that's a sign that you've crossed some kind of line. That's a sign that fan frustration has reached a level where they're willing to give up something they care about, going to games, supporting the team, in order to send a message. That's serious. That's the kind of thing that shouldn't be ignored or dismissed as overreaction. The third warning sign is the erosion of trust in media coverage. When fans start believing that beat reporters are carrying water for the team, when they start questioning whether reports are genuine or orchestrated, that's a warning sign that the organization has damaged its own credibility. Because once fans stop believing the official sources of information, once they start assuming everything is a PR move or a carefully managed narrative, the organization has lost a huge amount of control over its own story. And that's incredibly hard to get back. Once skepticism takes root, once people are looking for the hidden agenda in every announcement, once they're questioning motivations instead of accepting information at face value, that's a mode that's really hard to exit. You can try to rebuild trust, but every future announcement is going to be filtered through that lens of suspicion. The fourth warning sign is the generational impact. This isn't just about current fans. This is about what kind of impression this situation is leaving on younger people who are just forming their relationships with the team. If their first major interaction with the Browns is watching an organization manipulate a quarterback situation for business purposes, that's shaping how they're going to relate to this franchise moving forward. That's the kind of thing that has long-term consequences. The fifth warning sign is that winning might not even fix this. Because even if the Browns somehow win a championship next season, even if everything breaks perfectly and the quarterback situation plays out well, fans are still going to remember how we got here. They're still going to remember the feeling of being strung along. They're still going to be skeptical of future organizational decisions. Winning makes everything feel better in the moment, but it doesn't erase the damage to trust. The sixth warning sign is that the organization seems oblivious to these signals. They're not acting like they understand how serious this is. They're continuing with the same approach: ambiguous statements, delayed decisions, strategic leaks. They're not course correcting. They're not trying to rebuild trust. They're just doubling down on the strategy that got them here. That's particularly concerning because it suggests the organization doesn't understand or doesn't care about the damage they're doing to their relationship with the fanbase. And if they don't understand it now, they're going to be shocked when the real consequences show up in attendance and engagement and how people feel about the team. The seventh warning sign is the ripple effect. When fans lose trust in quarterback decision-making, they start questioning other decisions too. They start wondering if the coaching decisions are real or political. They start questioning whether the front office actually knows what it's doing. They start viewing every move through a lens of skepticism, and that skepticism becomes self-reinforcing. It makes even good decisions look questionable. Here's the bottom line about warning signs. They exist for a reason. They're meant to be heeded. They're meant to signal that something is wrong and something needs to change. And the Browns are surrounded by them. Attendance issues, boycott conversations, eroded trust in media, damage to the organization's credibility, and a fan base that's increasingly skeptical of everything the organization says and does. This is what happens when an organization prioritizes short-term attention over long-term trust. It works for a while. You get headlines, you get engagement, you get people talking. But eventually, people figure out what's happening. They realize they're being manipulated. And once that realization sets in, no amount of future good intentions is going to immediately fix what's been broken. The Browns have warning signs flashing all around them right now. The question is whether they're going to pay attention to those warnings or whether they're going to ignore them and find out the hard way what happens when you lose fan trust.